Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Odds On Favorites podcast. We're talking sports, entertainment, all with an eye on the bottom line. I'm Drew Goldfarb, joined once again by Rick Rockwell and Taylor Smith. Rick, welcome back. This week, we are starting with football and college football at that. We're going to preview the conferences as we approach the regular season. We've already knocked out the ACC and the Big 12 so far. So today, we're going to take a look at the Big 10. Taylor, who do you see coming out of this conference at season's end?
So it's pretty wide open. Ohio State's different this year with no Urban Meyer, no Dwayne Haskins. There's a lot of buzz around Michigan, which is scary because we've been waiting for Michigan to break out with Jim Harbaugh for years, and they've consistently underwhelmed. Michigan State is a little interesting because they have one of the best defenses in the country. I think that'll keep them competitive, but not sold the offense is going to be able to hold its own. Penn State's Penn State. The West is more wide open. Northwestern, I doubt, will win it again. I kind of like Nebraska on that side. They have a pretty easy schedule. They don't face either Michigan team. And they get Ohio State, Iowa, and Wisconsin all at home. So among the watered-down Western Division, I think Nebraska's kind of interesting.
You taking Nebraska to win the Big Ten?
I'll take Michigan, but I'll take Nebraska as the Western Division champion. Yeah.
Good to clarify that.
Yeah. I was like, whoa.
It's not 2001. I'm not going to go on that.
I was like, who am I co-hosting with? Like, what's going on here?
Eric Crouch coming back out of retirement. He's got a year of eligibility left somewhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nebraska definitely has the chance to they finished strong last year, 4-2 over the end of the season after starting 0-6. Frost is back to lead the school, back to prominence and stuff. I'm not quite sold on them yet to win the West. I still think Northwestern will be a good team. I know that they probably won't win it this year because they've lost their quarterback and their running back over the last couple seasons. They're two key contributors on offense. I love their coach. He fires me up when I watch him play. But I'm leaning towards Wisconsin to win the West because they're arguably the best running back in the country. They're a smash-mouth team. They run the ball. They play great defense. They have an exciting young quarterback, which might be their best quarterback they've had in years. So I believe they're going to bounce back and win that side of the conference. I wouldn't be surprised if Iowa was back up there. Iowa is Iowa. They're always a tough team. They win most of their games at home. If like Ohio State or somebody has to travel to Iowa, that's their best chance of winning a game like that. Otherwise, they'll fall down a little bit in terms of the overall conference. But you have to go with Wisconsin there. In the East, as much as I would love to say Penn State, I'm just glad it's not going to be Ohio State, to be honest. I'm sick and tired of Ohio State. I think they take a small step back. They'll still be a good school. They'll still make a big bowl game. But I think this is Michigan's year. You mentioned Michigan State. Michigan State has so much off-field drama going on at that university that D'Antonio is lucky to even keep his job. Like, I'm surprised they didn't just sweep through the whole university and wipe out everybody in leadership position, because what they've had going on has just been terrible. With that said, that defense is going to be phenomenal. They'll probably be the best in the Big Ten, if not right there with Michigan. I believe Michigan's going to have another talented defense this year. I believe they're going to have more talent on offense, at least more consistency on offense. Jim Harbaugh, in my opinion, that seat's warming up a little bit, bud, because you're not living up to the high expectations that come with a job at Michigan. If he was coaching at like Northwestern or something like that, and they were doing what they're doing, what Michigan's doing, he'd be fine. Everybody would be celebrating him. But this is Michigan. They haven't beat Ohio. They barely beat Ohio State once or twice in the last 2 decades. Last year, they were arguably the best team and then just got destroyed by Ohio State, and then basically lost 3 games on the year, which was not expected. People expected them to have at most 1 loss. People expected them to beat Ohio State last year. It was a disappointment. Honestly, Harbaugh's whole tenure has been a little bit disappointing, in my opinion. This is the year they have to come out firing. This is the year, like Taylor said, it's more open in the Big Ten this year. Penn State's not going to be as good. They're going to have a young quarterback. McSorley's gone. Saquon Barkley's 2 years removed now. Sanders has left. He, filled in great for Barkley. So they'll have a great defense also, but they got young, skilled positions that they got to develop. This is the year Michigan can take the whole Big Ten. This is the year that Michigan can possibly make the college football playoffs if they win the Big Ten, if they run through and go at least, 10-1, 11-1, whatever that, 11-1, 12-1 if they make it into the playoffs. I'm going with Michigan also, Taylor, man. I think this is their year finally. Harbaugh has to deliver.
I agree with you guys, at least on the surface. If there's going to be a year for Michigan to finally break through, it's this year. They get to host Ohio State this year. If you're going to beat the Buckeyes, that's a good start, is to be able to play them at home. It's also first-year head football coach in Ryan Day, where Urban Meyer's not part of the program any longer. He obviously has some experience running things, but not for a long-term kind of situation. It's still, they're one of those teams, though, that they should, in a number of occasions in the past 10 years, they should have been a better team. They've had these expectations before. And it's hard to say that not only would they beat Ohio State record-wise, but they would probably have to still beat OSU one-on-one because the Buckeyes do have 3 really challenging road games. They go to Nebraska. So if Nebraska is back, they were 4-8 last year. So it's a bit of a stretch to say that team is suddenly going to be 9-3. But if they are, they also go to Northwestern, who won the West last year, and they go to Michigan. So there is an opportunity for the Wolverines here to unseat the Buckeyes in that division and try to represent the Big Ten as its conference champion. It's really difficult to say, though, that the Wolverines have, with the track record they have of coming short of those expectations, it's a really tough thing to try to sit here and say Michigan is going to finally win the division, win the conference, because I really want to. And writers' polls would say that they are. Cleveland.com ran one where they pulled writers from across the conference, and they picked the Wolverines to win the Big Ten. They're ranked number 7 in the preseason coaches poll. Ohio State's ranked number 5. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I think Ohio State has a bit more talent, but I think there are more question marks associated with them. The one thing for me is if Michigan ends up winning the division, winning the conference, are they going to have a good enough record to advance to the college football playoff? Are they going to be able to do it at 12-1 after a conference championship game with one non-Ohio State loss somewhere in that schedule? Or are they going to win the division because Ohio State ends up losing 2 games, including one to Michigan, and Michigan ends up going 7-2 within the division and ends up on the outside, going to a really good bowl game, but with the Big Ten left out of the college football playoff? Rick, do you think that Michigan would, if you pick them to win their division, I'm assuming you're picking them to beat Wisconsin in the conference championship. Would you be picking Michigan to make it to the college football playoff? Are they going to be a 12-1 team after the conference championship game?
I believe that's the only way they'll make it to the college football playoff. And that if they can run the table and beat Ohio State, that's the key. For Michigan, every season, that's the key. The Ohio State game. If they can beat Ohio State, then it's smooth sailing from there. Penn State's not going to be as good. Michigan State's offense is going to be terrible. And then you look at the West, yes, you have Wisconsin in the championship game, but Wisconsin's lost more times in the Big Ten championship than they've won. Michigan should have the talent. They should have the coaching. Theoretically, on paper, they got enough of everything to be the best team. It's the Ohio State. Honestly, I think they have a chance of running the table and going undefeated this year if they play to their potential. Problem is they haven't played to their potential every season. That's why I can't just say go throw all your money on them. And hey, we use the saying all the time. To be the man, you got to beat the man. And right now, they're the man. Ohio State's still the man. So until they beat them, you can't be 100% confident in them. this far ahead of the season, this far ahead of the Big Ten play, I feel more comfortable with Michigan than any other team in the conference. And I think that if they fulfill their potential, they'll go to the college football playoff.
Taylor, do you see them getting into the college football playoff, or is this the conference that at least one of the conferences that would be left out as far as the Power Five goes?
It's not a lock by any means that any team gets in. I think you have Alabama and Clemson who have their, annual places locked up already. Even if they lose 5 games each, they'll still be allowed in because that's just the law. There's a decent chance there's another SEC team that gets in just because of SEC supremacy. And Oklahoma or Texas in the Big 12 has a good chance. So, Michigan has a pretty tough schedule. They got Wisconsin on the road. They face Penn State on the road. They got Notre Dame, Michigan State, and Ohio State all at home, which is good. But, it's just hard to go all in on this team since they've been so underwhelming for so long amid all these great expectations. I think Harbaugh's reputation is kind of overblown at this point based on the job he's done here. So I wouldn't bet on it. I wouldn't bet on Ohio State. Like Rick was saying, they have too many question marks. I'm not sold on any of these teams to actually make it to the playoff. One team obviously has to win the conference, but there's no guarantee they get the invitation. So, yeah, like Rose Bowl maybe, but I don't think a playoff appearance for any of them is a guarantee by any means.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big key is that if you're looking at Bama and Clemson having 2 of the 4 spots, you've got 3 conferences left in the Pac-12. You've got the Big 12 and the Big 10 all trying to compete for those last 2 spots. And as we all know, because, nothing's more exciting than a 9-6 game of field goals, the SEC is going to probably try to get 2 teams in. They should realistically have 7 in the 14 playoff because the SEC is just that good. I mean, Vanderbilt is spot. But that's kind of what it comes down to is you realistically are going to have 4 teams competing for – and that's assuming Notre Dame doesn't do something ridiculous as they've done on random years in the past where they end up running the table or going 11-1, where you end up with another team in contention for those 2 playoff spots because – yeah, I agree with you, Taylor. If Clemson and Bama win double-digit games and they win their division, they're going to end up in the college football playoff because how do you take out Clemson and Alabama? I also don't know that Alabama would necessarily would be removed from winning the SEC West, even if they lost a game this year. But if they did, then the SEC champion is going to get in, and then Bama, and then Clemson. So
yeah.
I think that we're in the Big Ten is one of those things that if Ohio State looked like Michigan, I would be saying Ohio State's a lock for the college football playoff. But because Michigan has the track record that Michigan does, I throw them in the same boat as like Oklahoma, which we've talked about a couple weeks ago, where they should, but I'd be much more confident in it if it was a bit different. There would have to be something a little different. Oklahoma has their own reasons to not be fully confident they're going to be able to run the table to get to the college football playoff. But, I think there's a lot of question marks. It's going to be an interesting season in the Big Ten for sure, but a lot of question marks surrounding the top teams. Let's talk NFL. We previewed both of the NFL's East divisions last week, so we're going to the North this time around. Let's start with the AFC. The Baltimore Ravens won the division with a 10-6 record a year ago. Steelers a half game back of them. The Browns just barely below 500 last year. Bengals were 6-10 at the bottom of the division. Rick, do you see anyone challenging the Ravens' throne this year? And why are the Cleveland Browns going to win the Super Bowl?
First of all, the Browns are Taylor's team. They've been Taylor's team for as long as I've known them. Second of all, there's no way the Ravens are winning the division. They might have a decent defense, but they've lost key players key leaders on defense. And then offensively, they got probably the worst passing quarterback in the NFL. Very talented, very athletic. I would rather have Blaine Gabbert than Lamar Jackson at quarterback. If I'm trying to throw the ball, yes, I would rather have that. If I'm just running the ball or pretending like I'm going to pass, obviously Jackson's going to do good. They got Ingram there. He'll help with the running game. They'll be a smash-mouth team. But come on, we all saw how Jackson played last year. Baltimore had to change their entire team, their entire offensive scheme for him. There's no way he's going to be a tremendous passer this year. Baltimore is not winning that division. So then you get rid of them. You get rid of Cincinnati because there's too many question marks there. Rookie head coach. A.J. Green, probably their best offensive weapon, gets hurt every season. He's already hurt now. Mixon gets hurt. He hasn't played a full season. He's going to be talented. They should have an offense that will really suit him best because they're going to bring in some L.A. Rams elements to this offense. So then it comes down to Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Track record-wise, Pittsburgh continues to be the best team between those two. In fact, Pittsburgh's dominated Cleveland. Cleveland's won 1 or 2 games against Pittsburgh in like the last decade. Cleveland has plenty of talent. But you know what? Here we go again. Until you beat the man, you're not the man. You can't just come in and be like, well, we got these talent, we got these players, we're going to win it all. No. You still got to go to Pittsburgh and beat them. You still got to go to Baltimore and beat them. You've even got to beat the Bengals in state. Okay? And until you do that, please stop with all this Cleveland hype. They're the most overhyped team in the NFL right now, right next to the Raiders. I hate to say this, but I almost feel like by default, I'm going with the Steelers. Juju has proven that he can take Antonio Brown's place in that offense. They've got enough young receivers behind him to still spread out the ball. They got a decent running game. Now that they know Bell's not coming back, they don't have to deal with any of those distractions. Their defense is going to be a little bit improved. Yes, Big Ben's a little older, but he was one of the best quarterbacks statistically last year, top 5 in most categories, even fantasy football, which, for most of us, that means a lot. I'm going with Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh's going to win. I think Cleveland has a shot at getting up there, but until they beat Pittsburgh, I can't take Cleveland. I can't take your team, Taylor. Taylor, I can't do it.
I'm really offended that I have this label now. I think I picked the Browns to win like once last year, and now I'm Browns guy forever. But I'm seeing the Browns at plus 125, which is way too inflated for me to win the division. You got Pittsburgh at plus 190 and Baltimore at plus 260. I'd much rather take Baltimore at that price than Cleveland at plus 125. The Ravens have a pretty easy schedule out of the gates. They get Miami and Arizona weeks 1 and 2, which, there should be guaranteed wins, you would think. Pittsburgh has a tougher schedule. They got New England right off the bat. They play Seattle. San Francisco on the road I don't think is an easy game now. Cincinnati at home's a win. And then you got Baltimore and the Chargers before the bye. It's not inconceivable that they go 1-5 in that stretch, or 2-4, which obviously puts them at a disadvantage. I get the hype with Cleveland. There's a lot to like. They were way better last season than they were, have been for the last decade or 2 decades, 3 decades. But just that betting price on them to win the division is way too inflated, I think. I still think they might be the best team on paper, but I don't think this division's very good in the first place. I would still take a more proven team like Baltimore or Pittsburgh at better odds than I would Cleveland with a new coach, with a second-year quarterback, with a wide receiver that's known to get hurt coming in. It's just not the lock that many people seem to view it as. And, I get why they're the favorites, but I'd be more willing to bet on some of these other teams first, just at better odds.
Who are you taking?
I'll take Baltimore. I don't really think Pittsburgh has all that much depth. I don't think Big Ben's very good in spite of his inflated stats last season. He's not getting any younger. I think Lamar Jackson's being a little undersold from people. I don't really get why they're at plus 260. I know they didn't win the division by much last year, but that's just really low, I think, for that team. So I would take the value. I'd just take Baltimore.
I tend to agree with Taylor on it because I think that, Rick, you pointed out that Baltimore lost a few key players. Well, so did Pittsburgh. And yeah, we know that they replaced their running back. They didn't really have Bell at all last year. So that's not really a loss compared to last year's team. But their receiving core is a bit thinner. And when you factor in Roethlisberger, there's going to be a time where Ben Roethlisberger just hits that wall. And I know that people have said that with Tom Brady for 7 years at this point. But it will apply to him eventually too. he may just have retired by then, and he may have celebrated his 55th birthday before that happens. But when it comes to Roethlisberger, he is getting up there, and I don't know that he's ever been – I know that statistically last year he had a really good year, but that's more of a bit of an anomaly, a weird peak. And when you thin out the roster a bit around him, I don't know that is going to be feasible again this year. Their running game may actually be better this year, just without the headache involved in figuring out when, if, will he, why, when, what, where. But I think that every question mark you might have on Baltimore, you could easily apply to Pittsburgh, and Baltimore was a half game better than Pittsburgh last year. Now, if you want to say that Pittsburgh doesn't
except for the key position, Pittsburgh still has a better quarterback. Baltimore had a better defense. Their defense isn't going to be as good.
But their quarterback is as much of a question mark this year as it was last year, and they won the division last year.
By their defense.
So they could do it again.
They lost too many pieces on defense.
I would lean towards Baltimore. The Browns, I won't believe the Browns are even going to be a playoff team until they've clinched. And even then, I probably won't believe it until I see the graphic showing them playing in the wild card weekend.
Exactly.
Like it would have to be like, hey, welcome to this game in Pittsburgh as the Pittsburgh Steelers host the Cleveland Browns in the first round of the playoffs. That would be the moment I would go, I think they're going to make the playoffs this year. But until that happens.
It's just the odds are so ridiculous. I'd be much more into them if they were the same as the Steelers at plus 190 or something like that. I just don't get where this respect is coming from. Plus 125. I think it's part of that the division's bad and it's wide open, so it's basically a crapshoot. But just with such an unproven team, I don't see how you can be so bullish on them.
I think it has to be driven by betting money, just people who are trying to get in on Cleveland before they become favored heavily, and it just made them favored heavily. Because there's no real explanation for a franchise that has never been good since its resurgence after re-expansion. Before we get into the NFC, speaking of Cleveland, there's a prop bet available for the Browns. It's kind of unique. Rick wrote an article on this at gamblingsites.org earlier in the week. What kind of facial hair will Browns QB Baker Mayfield sport for week 1 of the regular season? Shortest odds are for mustache only at plus 110, a full beard at plus 175. Other options include clean shaven at plus 300, a horseshoe mustache at plus 700, and a soul patch at plus 3,000. Taylor, do you have a betting favorite or just a style favorite of your own for Baker here?
So I believe he's got mustache right now. That's what he's currently rocking. It seems like most often in the past he's gone with full beard. Last year he had the full beard kind of going. He's had a handlebar. I see a picture of him with a handlebar right here. It might be a college photo. I'm thinking mustache is the favorite just because that's what he has right now. And if he likes it, then he might just keep it up. There's value on mutton chops at plus 2,000, which is probably something that's never been uttered in the history of the English language.
That is one of my favorite phrases I've ever heard. There's value on mutton chops.
Plus 2,000, that pays out pretty nicely if it hits. I'd lean mustache here just because it's what he has right now. Seems logical.
Rick?
I had a blast writing this article and going through the different facial hairstyles that are available. And, I've tried a lot of these different, styles over the years. He has rocked the full beard. He has gone clean shaven. He looks like, as I put in my article, like he hasn't even hit puberty when he's clean shaven. Here's the thing. Once you start messing around with facial hairstyles and trying different things, the last thing you do is go back to clean shaven. There's a chance he can because he's done it before. He can go full beard because he's done it before. But who wants to go full beard in August in Cleveland or anywhere on the East Coast? Too humid, too hot. Full beard would be ridiculous. He's going to mess around something with some kind of mustache. I want a Fu Manchu. I want the Hulk Hogan horseshoe. I want the chevron, the 70s porn stash. I would even like to see that on him. I think he can try so many different styles, and he's the kind of guy that will try different styles. You have to go with mustache and hope it's going to be a cool-looking mustache because you know what? There are some styles that it takes a real man to rock, and I think he can do it. I think he can pull it off. mustache only.
So I do see that as a very reasonable play, especially given that he has a mustache at the moment. I do think, though, that because he has a mustache at the moment, the alternative play is clean shaven, with the goal that he would set of growing a full beard over the course of the season, because we do see players who will grow out their beard over the course of 4 or 5 months that will start clean shaven and just never shave during the season. And that is it. You don't go from a mustache to a full beard without going to clean shaven first, or at the very least going down to stubble, because you've got to even it out. You can't have the mustache be poking out an extra, with an extra 3 weeks of growth behind your beard. A little weird. So I would say that clean shaven might actually offer some value at plus 300 because of the fact that if he's going back to the beard, he's got to start clean shaven. So that would be my play on it. I do think the mustache is safer. But very quickly, let's go to the NFC North. The Chicago Bears were the only team to win more than 8 games last season, going 12-4. Minnesota was 8-7-1. The Packers and Lions each won just 6 games. Taylor, who do you see being the biggest threat to the Bears repeating as division champs? And can any of these teams be a true contender to win the NFC?
I think, Chicago's a worthwhile favorite. They proved it last year. Their defense is maybe the best in the entire league. Mitch Trubisky played well. I think he has potential to step forward again in year 3. But of the other teams, I think Minnesota's the most undervalued at plus 210 to win the division. The Green Bay Packers are plus 190. Obviously, Green Bay has the Aaron Rodgers factor, but beyond that, it's just not a very impressive group of talent. Minnesota, I think, is a team that underperformed last year. They had big expectations with Kirk Cousins coming in, didn't live up to them. I think the offense can be better this season. The offensive line's been retooled quite a bit. They still have good talent around him. They have, 2 arguably top 20 receivers in the game alongside him there. So if I'm going to take a flyer beyond Minnesota at plus 210, Chicago at plus 170 is still a worthwhile bet. I'd much rather do that than Cleveland at plus 125 to win their division. So there's decent value all around here. But I would just go either Chicago or Minnesota. I'm not a believer in Green Bay.
And that's coming from a Browns fan.
I can't believe you're putting down your team like that. So,
you all.
Yeah. And Blake Bortles is still your man. So listen, the Bears are the benchmark right now in this division. Packers, you can't trust them on defense right now. They made some moves. They let Clay Matthews go. Like they're going to reshape that defense, come up with a new identity. Offensively, you can't trust their running game. They haven't had a 1,000-yard rusher, and I don't even remember the last time they had one. And Aaron Jones, he's so frustrated for a fantasy owner that it's hard to think he's going to do anything consistently this year, even though people are trying to hype him up now. Outside of Adams at receiver, they have all unproven depth behind him, after him. Graham should do well this year. They got a new coach. There's too many question marks with them. You got Rodgers and a lot of question marks. And usually, if the Bears weren't as good as they were, you can say, well, maybe the Packers because they got Aaron Rodgers. Still, this year you can't. It comes down to the Bears and the Vikings. I picked the Vikings to win, to compete for the NFC championship last year, and they let me down big time. They had it all came down to their offensive line. It was horrible. It was one of the worst offensive lines in the league. Could barely rush the ball, couldn't protect the quarterback. They were terrible. With this year, though, like Taylor said, they've improved the O-line. They still have a solid, probably top 10 defense again. They have a shutdown corner who will lock down number 1 receivers. They got a pass rush. They got a solid defense. Offensively, if that line holds up, they got 2 great receivers, top 20 easily in Thielen and Diggs, very serviceable tight end in Rudolph, and they're going to have a dynamic running back as long as he's healthy, and Dalvin Cook, who people are saying he looks great this year. He looks fully healthy and fully recovered. He's a dual threat running back. You add all this together, Minnesota has the pieces. They're worth a flyer. But the safe play is the Bears because they still have arguably the best defense in the NFL. They're not going to take a step back on offense. And if anything, that offense should be even better with players developing. And they should be able to contend for the NFC title this year. They made the playoffs. They made a good run last year. They're going to be better, more consistency. Khalil Mack on that defense is ferocious. Like, you have to go dub Bears for this bet and flyer on the Vikings. And I do believe the Bears can contend with the Saints, the Rams, and whoever comes out of the NFC East to win the NFC.
I mean, I agree with both of you. You guys pretty much said it all. I do think that the Vikings have a shot. I think that they're probably more of a wild card team, but might be worth a flyer if you have more confidence in them, especially after last year's disappointment. But the Bears are the best chance for a team from that division to contend for a spot in the Super Bowl. So I think the Bears are the safer play, but if you wanted to pick the Vikings, if you really had faith that they were going to bounce back and that the expectations they had a year ago were going to be realized this year, wouldn't stop you on it. Got a few quick hits for you this week. We begin in college basketball, where the NCAA has unveiled a new rule requiring any agents that wish to represent players that are considering leaving school early for the NBA draft to have, among other things, a bachelor's degree of their own. This is being referred to as the Rich Paul rule, referencing agent Rich Paul, who represents clients that include LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Draymond Green, and Ben Simmons. Paul does not have a bachelor's degree and has become one of the most successful agents working with NBA players. Taylor, what do you think of this new rule?
It's ridiculous. It's clearly aimed at Rich Paul, who has become maybe the biggest agent in the NBA without having gone to college and gotten a degree, which is a completely arbitrary thing, an arbitrary criteria to just throw in there. The NCAA is all about power. They're trying to retain as much power as they possibly can over these prospective pro athletes. Obviously, they want them to stay in college as long as possible without going pro. That generates more money for them, even though it doesn't generate any for the athletes themselves. They're seeing more and more players are choosing to go overseas or just sit out a year before turning pro as a way of getting around that age limit instead of going to college for a year, just because there's really no reason for them to. I imagine that NBA age limit's going to be struck down within the next few years anyway. So the NCAA sees the writing on the wall. It's trying to do anything it can to retain power and just try to remain relevant. And this is an example of that. I imagine they're going to face some kind of litigation for this. It's probably not going to go well for them. It just comes off poorly all around, I think.
You have a compelling argument there. I mean, it's hard. There's some things that I like about it and some things I don't like about it. And that's the way I feel about the NCAA period. I mean, there's some things I like that they do, and then there's actually maybe more things that I don't like that they do. But then you have a lot of controversies and scandals going on with agents and players and other sports and stuff. So it's like they have a broken system. They haven't found out how to fix this system in decades. And their one attempt to do it has just been blown up in their face. I struggle with which side I want to come down on this one, because there's a lot that I dislike on both sides and a few that I like on both sides. I think the biggest factor for me is this. First of all, I can't stand the NCAA governing body. I just think they've missed the boat on so many things, and the stuff they talk about with sports betting just drives me insane. Like, I've written so many articles about them and their thoughts about sports betting itself that they drive me insane in that regard. But the bachelor degree, coming back to that, we used to live in a society, in a country where a bachelor's degree meant something to get an employment, to show you had an education and stuff, but we've moved from there. It's not necessarily needed anymore. Not all businesses are looking at it and saying, well, you got to have a bachelor's degree. So why would they put that in there unless they're going to target somebody? That's a little bit weak. That's a little bit ridiculous. Actually, that's a lot of bit ridiculous now that I think about it. Man, this NCAA is just like, they never stop just being ridiculous. They got to tweak this. Taylor, you're right. It's probably going to have a lot of legal ramifications. I don't see this lasting. I don't see this even going into effect without a huge legal battle. I think this is just going to cause more problems than anything. And honestly, I really hope it blows up in their face and players don't even go to college and they go play in the G League, the D League, some semi-pro league, go to China, go wherever else and play for a year. Because you know what? If you're that good to get paid to play, why go to college? If you're not going to go to get a degree, why even go at all? It's the NCAA that's trying to force this process so they can get their money. So, Taylor, I'm with you. I have a few little caveats. I have a few little issues, but I'm with you on this one.
I'm going to make it unanimous. I mean, the thing with this is that it seems to be done where the NCAA is trying to present it as being done to protect the athletes. It's being done in their best interest. They have to take a test with the NCAA on a certain day in order to be certified by them for that year. They've got to be certified by the NBA Players Association for 3 years. And they have to have this bachelor's degree. And the way they present it and the way that they're trying to and hoping it will be received is that they're acting in the best interest of the players. But the most dangerous and dastardly rules and laws are the ones that are proposed and enacted by a governing body under the guise of protecting a certain group. But in reality, all it does is target that group. It is basically being proposed as we're trying to help the players. And meanwhile, they're basically keeping their players from access to the biggest agent in the NBA. They are harming their players under the guise of protecting their players. I've said it before. The NCAA, as a governing body, is evil, corrupt, and just dumb. Because the truth of the matter is that if at any point in the last 20 years they said, you know what, we kind of see what's happening, we see the point, or even if they didn't see the point and they just saw what was happening, and they said, we should give them something, give the players something so that this doesn't escalate, they would have been fine. But for the last 20 years, as college basketball, college football, college athletics as a whole, but those two in particular, have grown into being bigger than some major professional sports leagues that are considered to be among the biggest 5, 6 in the United States. They have basically dug their heels in and continue to cut off appendages in an effort to protect the body. And meanwhile, if they just said, let's share, they would be fine. So again, this is another one of those things where they're basically presenting it as a way to protect the players, protect the integrity of the game with that whole amateur status BS. It's the same thing. It's the NCAA trying to keep every cent they can in their own pockets, hoping that someone who went to a university that is NCAA accredited for 4 years might be able to better convince a player who would be a top 10 draft pick after their freshman year of college to go back to school for another year for no purpose other than to earn the NCAA more money because they're throwing away a year's worth of NBA salary and a top 10 pick and risking injury. Zion Williamson nearly got hurt, and he did get hurt. He nearly cost himself draft status. How many millions would he have lost if that ankle injury had been a little bit worse? This is another situation where the NCAA is trying to present their evil as something good for the players, and they're acting in their own selfish interests.
Preach it, brother.
I do it. Watch my video on this channel about how the NCAA is about paying their players. Do that. But right now, let's talk UFC. The Ultimate Fighting Championships in South America this weekend for UFC Uruguay. Main event features Valentina Shevchenko defending her women's flyweight championship against challenger Liz Carmouche. Carmouche and Shevchenko fought back in 2010 under the banner of C3. That was a fight that saw Carmouche hand Shevchenko her first career professional loss. It's the only non-decision loss of Shevchenko's career. Rick, can Shevchenko get payback for that loss and retain her title?
Oh, absolutely. She is going to win the fight. But just real quickly on their first fight, the fight was stopped by a ref because she had a bad cut over her right eye after the second round. And so it was either right or left eye. And so she didn't get knocked out, but it was stopped because of the injury, which was a legit shot, kick to the head. Up kick, I think Carmouche said. So that was legitimate. She lost fair and square. But she didn't lose because she was really TKO knocked out. She lost because of a cut that they couldn't stop the bleeding, and the ref said that's enough. With that said, Carmouche has basically gone 500 since then. Shevchenko has basically skyrocketed up to the upper echelon of women's MMA. Her only 2 losses since then were to Amanda Nunes, who they believe will be a trilogy fight in the near future with that. Shevchenko has everything you need to be a legitimate champion for a long time in this division. Carmouche, I believe, is on the downside of her prime. She's still strong. The odds, the way they have the odds right now, Carmouche is worthy of a flyer for extreme risk takers. Last I saw, she was like between plus 700, plus 800 with some betting sites. She's beat her once. She's fought all the best along the way. So there is some merit if you really want to take a big flyer on somebody. I would rather bet on Carmouche to win than Taylor's Cleveland Browns to win. With that said, Shevchenko is going to win this fight. She's going to get her revenge. I think it goes the distance because they're both 2 strong, 2 talented fighters. I don't see Carmouche getting stopped before then. I don't see Carmouche winning the fight either. I think Shevchenko is in her prime. She's at her peak, and she's going to win this fight.
Taylor, I sent you a video of the finish of Shevchenko's last fight that I think I had you watch to introduce you to Valentina Shevchenko and the Shevchenko sisters. But so with that burned into your brain, that head kick knockout, what pick are you making here?
Yeah, this is a pretty easy call. There's also no edge in the odds at all. She's a minus 1,200 favorite I'm seeing. Carmouche may have beaten her last time, but that was nearly a decade ago. It's weird to think that 2010 was almost a decade ago, by the way, but I looked at that and was like, oh, that's not that long ago. And then I realized it's 2019. That was an extremely long time ago. So
think of how many games your Browns have lost in that time span.
I'm never going to do this.
I think your Browns have lost about 100 games in that time span.
They've definitely won under 10 since then. Carmouche, maybe if she gets the fight to the ground, she has a puncher's chance, but it's really hard to see how that can happen. Shevchenko is just way better at this point in their respective careers. So I don't even think you can vouch for taking a flyer on Carmouche, even if it is near plus 1,000. It's just very obvious, like Rick was saying. So I don't really think you can bet on either side.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's no value on taking Shevchenko, and unless you're just really in it for the risk, I don't know that Carmouche is worth the flyer. But I am still scarred from being at that fight, at Shevchenko's last fight, with that head kick where her opponent was – she was not out nearly as long as it appeared, but in the stands when she doesn't move on the canvas for a solid 60 seconds, that was the most terrifying thing I've seen in the 10 UFC events I've been to, or dozen UFC events I've been to. So been scarred from that for a few months at this point. So
in a small coma.
Yeah. And then she danced because, it's anyway. Last topic, time for some NASCAR. Drivers of the Monster Energy are in Michigan this weekend for the Consumers Energy 400. Taylor, who do you see picking up the win this week?
I'm going to take the easy out. I'm going to say Kyle Busch. I'm seeing him at 9-2. I think that's favorable enough. If you want a kind of sleeper, I think Chase Elliott has decent value. He just won this past week at the Glen. 14-1 is pretty profitable, obviously, if that hits. Kevin Harvick, Joey Logano, it's pretty easy just to take the favorites here. I'm not that bullish on Martin Truex this week. I imagine Rick might make a contrarian case to that argument, but I'll take the chalk. I'll take Kyle Busch. Really going out on the limb this time.
Kyle Busch is an odds-on favorite to win every week. So really picking him to win is not out of the realm. Like, it's a smart pick. It's a safe play each and every week for the most part. Chase Elliott's performance last week was phenomenal. He dominated almost the entire race. Led from the pole, led at least close to 90% of the laps, and just put on his best performance as a professional racer. With that said, I don't see him duplicating that this week. I'm actually surprisingly finding myself – well, first of all, let's just say this. Logano won at Michigan the first time back in June of this year. So he has a legitimate chance of winning again, sweeping both races. A value play would be Kyle Larson because he runs well at these tracks. This distance is also a good distance for Truex. And, Kyle Busch, like I said, is always someone you can look at. But I think I'm finally leaning towards Kevin Harvick to win a race. He finally got, his first win a couple weeks ago. So I've always said until he wins, I can't pick him again. He's finally won. He's got one win on the season. He's firmly entrenched as number 3 in the standings. He's constantly performed well enough to finish in the top 10 each week. He just wasn't close enough to getting that checker flag. Now he's got one. He's got it off his back. That pressure's off. He's raced well before at Michigan. I think he has a chance to win this weekend. I'm going to go with him instead of taking somebody from Joe Gibbs Racing because they honestly have 3 of the top 6 drivers in NASCAR. They have the most wins out of any team in NASCAR this year. Busch, Truex, and Hamlin are tearing it up each and every week. So instead of taking Joe Gibbs Racing this week, I'm going to go with Kevin Harvick, the number 4 car.
I don't think that either of those picks would be a bad place to go, Harvick and Busch. But you guys both made really solid points on it. So I would just basically recommend pick whichever who your favorite is, whether you prefer Rick or you prefer Taylor. That's who you should bet for. That's the decision you have to make as a viewer. Harvick, Busch, Rick, Taylor. There you go. Or Penn State and the Browns. There, if you wanted to look at it that way too, that also works. Well, before Taylor
on the show again,
I was about to say before Taylor storms off, that's going to do it for this edition of the Odds On Favorites podcast. Make sure to check out gamblingsites.org for more from these guys right here. Check back next week for another edition of the podcast on the Odds On Favorites YouTube channel. They're Rick Rockwell and Taylor Smith. I'm Drew Goldfarb. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.